So after 3 years, Elias returns to see King Ahab. Ahab had allowed Jezebel to hunt down and kill all of the priests throughout the kingdom of Israel, except for about 100 of them. These true priests of God were in hiding, and Jezebel had replaced all of them with false prophets to her god Melkart. So Elias comes back, and he gets the king's ear because he had prophesied no rain for 3 years, and here it was 3 years later, and there had been no rain. And it was pretty serious conditions that the country were in. And so Elias comes back and he challenges the false prophets. And he says, I want to show all the people, and this is the purpose I did. He wanted to show all the people the power of God, to bring the people back to God. Whether or not he could bring the king back to God or not, or the queen ever could be brought to God, was not as important as all the people. Many thousands and thousands of people's souls were at stake. And so Elias knew that he had to do something to show the people the power of God. So he challenges the prophets to a contest. He says, all right, we're each going to build. So it's Elias, Jezebel. Let me put the name up here for you so you have it. He comes back. Elias challenges the false prophets to a contest. Two altars, 2 oxen, and what they'll do is they'll pray. The false prophets will pray to their gods and ask their gods to consume the oxen that's on their altar. And Elias will pray to God and ask God to consume the altar that is, and the oxen that is on the altar. Yes?
What is consuming?
To consume means, one of the ways you can put it is to eat something. What happens if you eat something? You consume it, it's gone, right? To take it away, okay? You can consume your food, but it means a little bit more than that. It could mean, in some cases, to take away, okay? To eat up. To take away is not exactly right, because if there's this piece of chalk here and I took it away, I didn't consume it. Okay? To consume it means that not only do you remove it, you permanently remove it. You get rid of it. Okay? Generally, when you eat something, it's not coming back. If it does, it's not coming back in the same form, right? Some of you have been sick before. When you throw up the spaghetti and meatballs, it doesn't come out the same way it went down. Okay? So, to consume means to remove permanently. So the contest was to see whose gods would consume the oxen that were on the altar. And Elias says, you go first. So the false prophets all get together, and there's a whole slew of them, whole bunch of false prophets, and they begin to pray and to call out. And they begin praying all day. From morning until noon. No answer for their prayers. So then they begin to shout out louder and louder. And they begin to cut themselves, okay, to try to make something happen. Now, why would they do that? Let me ask you. Let me pause for a moment. Why would they cut themselves? Katie? Well, that's a good thought. I like that, but not exactly. No, that's a good thought though. Pat,
For a sacrifice.
for sacrifice. You're thinking like true believers, like you were making a sacrifice for God. They're not trying to make a sacrifice for God. Siobhan?
To show our Lord's character.
No, because remember, these are false prophets. These are the false prophets who are cutting themselves. Misconduct.
The devil was in them.
The devil, there we go. Now we're getting somewhere. The devil was in them, or the devil was. Kara, what are you going to say?
They thought the gods were angry, so they cut themselves.
Okay, yeah. It had to do with their false gods. It had to do with the devils, okay? The devils want us to do things like self-mutilation, okay? We're warned against doing that. Our bodies are the temples of God. And we're not supposed to sin or mutilate ourselves or do bad things to ourselves. And so the devils like to try to get people to do that kind of things. So if they were, in the past, maybe they've offered their sacrifices to these devils, and one of the things the devils would want them to do in order to answer their prayers, right, would be to cut themselves and injure themselves. And then the devils would do something as if they were a god, right, because we have instances, even in the Bible it tells us, that false prophets can sometimes do things through the power of fallen angels. Moses went and he took his staff, right? And he threw his staff on the floor and it turned into a snake. What did the false prophets of the Pharaoh do? They took their staffs and threw them down as well, and they turned into snakes through the power of those fallen angels. And then Moses' staff, the snake, ate all of the other snakes before, and he picked it back up and it returned into his staff. So they do have, the devils do have some powers, and they try to fool people by doing that. That's their goal, to fool people. And so they're cutting themselves because they're hoping that they'll get the false devils to answer, but God's not letting them answer. Okay? God's not letting them answer now. And Elias actually starts to make fun of the false prophets. He said, oh, maybe they can't hear you. Maybe you got to pray louder. And they get just going to an absolute frenzy. They're screaming and yelling and they're cutting themselves. And nothing's happening. So finally, Elias says, all right, it's my turn. So he goes and he gets a bunch of buckets of water. And he takes the water and he pours it all over his altar. And soaks it and pours it all over the oxen. Until it's just standing water. The whole thing is soaked. Okay? It's so soaked that no human would be able to light up the altar and the oxen at this point. If you had a torch, you could put the torch in it, and the torch is going to go out because of the water that's all over. It's all so soaked. Okay? And then Elias prayed. He prays to the true God. And immediately, in an instant, the entire oxen and altar are consumed with a flame from heaven. And all of the people who are watching, they all fall on their knees. And they cry out, the Lord is God. The people remembered God. The people remembered who he was. The people wanted to return to God. But unfortunately, this did not. This great miracle did not change Jezebel and Achab's wicked ways. And both end up suffering terrible deaths. Yes?
Did the false prophets fall on their knees?
Probably they ran away because they were terrified of several things. They were terrified of the power of the true God. They were probably also terrified of what Jezebel was going to do to them because they failed. It's a good question. Would I say that all of them? Maybe not. I don't know. I won't say that none of them did. Maybe some of them did convert. Or we don't know. Okay. One would hope maybe some of them did. But people who worship idols and demons a lot of times can become possessed too, because possession only can occur when you let your will give in to the demon little by little, and obviously those priests, those false prophets, had been doing that. They've been giving their wills over to demons. So who knows? I don't know, but one could hope. Both Jezebel and Achab suffered horrible deaths. In fact, Jezebel at one point fell out of a window, fell to her death, and Elias had prophesied that the dogs would eat her, and they did. The dogs came and ate Jezebel after she had died. That was how humiliating her death was because of her sinfulness.
Were the dogs actually coyotes?
I don't know. I don't know what they were. And they might have just been dogs. Dogs, especially dogs out in the wild and roaming around the streets, aren't going to be very selective about what they can eat. If it's there, they're going to eat it. Yes?
Does it say how Achan died?
Yeah, that's a whole story that we're not going to get into. It had to do with he was confused by what happened for a while, but then Jezebel got back to him, and there was some land disputes, and he took the land that was supposed to be used by this man, and I think even maybe dedicated to building a church or not for himself, and he ends up suffering a bad death, not quite as gruesome as Jezebel's, because she was truly wicked, but he dies a rather discouraging and dishonorable death as well. So Elias brings many people back to God at this point. That doesn't mean that the problems are going to be over for the kingdom of Israel. They never really end for the kingdom of Israel, that's for sure. But for the time being, Elias now has a student. Let's call him a student. Okay, he's his companion, but he's also a student. Now let's be careful. Notice how similar their names are. You have Elias, and then you have Eliseus. Okay, Eliseus was Elias' companion. He was kind of his disciple. Disciple's a good word for it. And Elias was getting ready to leave this world. And he said to Eliseus, he said, "What can I do for you before I leave? What do I need to do to kind of complete your training and to make you realize that you need to now step into my shoes and be a prophet for the people?" Okay? It takes a lot of sacrifice to do that. And Eliseus asked that he should have double the spirit of Elias and work for God as Elias had done. So in other words, he was saying, I only wish to have your spirit, double your spirit even, okay, to be able to work for the people. I need that, okay? What you've done is so amazing, and you're so holy, but I need double your drive and your desire and your will, because I won't be able to do it unless I have that, okay? That was a pleasing thing for him to ask for, because he was doing it because he realized that if he was going to take over and become the prophet that like Elias was, that he would need to be really fortified with God's graces. Okay? That's what he was asking for. And after he asked that, a fiery chariot appears in the sky. Okay? When this flaming chariot comes down from heaven, and it carries Elias away. Elias is one of two people that we know from the Bible, at least, that are mentioned in the Bible, that were taken directly up to heaven. We have other people that may have been assumed at some point or another, but there's two that we know that were taken up to walk with God in heaven, so to speak, and Elias was one of them. But as he's carried off, his mantle, okay, this kind of like cloak that he wore, it fell off of him onto the ground, okay? And Eliseus picks up his mantle and puts it on, and it is a symbol of him. It's the we now have a term. It's called the passing of the mantle. Okay, if you've ever heard it, it's a phrase that we use to say that power has been given from one person to the next. You could say that about King David to Solomon. There was the passing of the mantle from one to the next. We use the term in sports when a team that has been very dominant for many years loses to a new team that looks like it's going to be very strong. We might say there's a passing of the mantle of power in that sport from one team to the next. That's used quite often. This is what it's from. That the mantle was passed. His mantle was passed. Like he took it off, like a king taking off his crown and giving it to the next king. that has been passed on. And in fact, immediately thereafter, Eliseus performs many miracles. Not only does he perform many miracles, but he also preaches to the people, tries to bring them back to God. He warns them of their evilness, to give it up. Okay? But despite his great miracles and his fiery preaching and his goodness, the people of the kingdom of Israel do not heed his warnings. He warns them. But the people do not heed his warnings. They do not, let's put, change their evil ways. There's multiple things that they do. I mean, they're sinful. They are live lives of impurity. They marry pagan women. But especially the thing that was so terrible before the eyes of God is here's his chosen people. He's given them the one true religion, and yet they keep falling into idolatry. They keep falling into idolatry. And God punishes them for that. His punishment is that the entire kingdom is defeated by the Assyrians. Now, this is only the kingdom of Israel that we are talking about right now. Okay, we will talk about the kingdom of Judah tomorrow. But this didn't just all happen within just a few kings. It took a lot of time. Many hundreds of years passed. Okay, God kept trying to bring them back. They kept falling, but it was the kingdom of Judah where the remnants of the true faith were to hold on to the most. We'll talk about some good kings and some bad kings in the kingdom of Judah and the prophets that they had there as well. But it was the Assyrian Empire that was to take the kingdom of Israel over. The Assyrians were that bloodthirsty Mesopotamian civilization empire that we have discussed in the past. They captured them. There were some great things that happened during the time of the captivity, but this is not yet what we call the Babylonian captivity. There is going to come a point when we will discuss the Babylonian captivity, but mind you, this is the Assyrians, not the Babylonians, so be careful. The kingdom of Israel was defeated and taken over, and many were taken slaves to come into the Assyrian Empire. The kingdom of Israel would never return to power again. Okay? Some of the chosen people, the Jews, would remain faithful to God in captivity. Some may have returned, but when they returned to Jerusalem. And when they returned to Jerusalem, where was Jerusalem? Where was Jerusalem? And what kingdom was Jerusalem? Joey? Kingdom of Judah. Okay, so any return was a return to the kingdom of Judah. Their captivity took place several hundred years before the capture of the kingdom of Judah, because the kingdom of Judah, even though sometimes it would fall into idolatry, kept at least trying to return to God until finally they just fell again and did not, and God punished them. But God's punishments were always meant to bring the people back to Him, because one of the major saving graces of the Jewish people was that when they did fall upon hard times, they would remember God, they would repent, and God would forgive them. Yes? Yes. Or we're not going to... many of the prophets trained other prophets. Many of the prophets would have had other disciples and etc. Maybe that we're not even told about in the Bible. The Bible just tries to point out some of the important people and events that occurred when it is able, but it's not a full story of everything that occurs either. Even in the New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles, you know what the Acts of the Apostles say? There are just so many things that Jesus did during the course of his life that it's impossible to write it all down. It would take books and books and books and books and books to do it. And instead, God gave us His church. So we have sacred Scripture and we have His church, which are the teachings of Christ, okay, which give us, put together, give us the Catholic Church. Yes?
When it says entire kingdom, does that mean
No. When I say entire kingdom, I mean Elias and Eliseus were not even alive when the kingdom was taken anymore. It was years after he died that the kingdom was taken over by the Assyrians. But when I say the entire kingdom, I mean all 10 tribes that formed the kingdom of Israel were taken over. There was none. The entire thing was taken over. Okay? The Assyrians were stopped, however, by the kingdom of Judah. They never took over the kingdom of Judah because Judah had remained true to God and God protected them. And that's one of the stories we're going to take a look at coming up. It's quite an amazing story because the Assyrians had a huge army. It was 180, 190,000 men. Okay? And they were going to march on the kingdom of Judah, but they were going to be defeated by the power of God because the kingdom of Judah at the time had remained faithful to God. It wasn't until the Babylonians came along that the kingdom of Judah was allowed to be taken into bondage, into slavery, and we'll talk about that. But we've got to talk about some of the events that happened in the kingdom of Judah first before we get there. Okay, and we'll talk about the Israelites and the Jews when they are in captivity. There's some amazing stories. I mean, the story of Daniel in the lion's den. Okay, the story of I think it's Judith happened when they were in captivity. The story of Esther did for sure. Okay, actually, I think Judith would have been right before part of the Assyrians trying to attack the kingdom of Judah. But the story of Esther took place when they were in captivity, when the Assyrians wanted to kill all the Jews, and Esther protected her people. So we have some very neat Bible stories that are going to occur during the captivity. We're going to see how those returns to God of many people and the prophets. Daniel was a great prophet, okay, who helped to convert many of the people back to the true faith. And then many of the people, because of the influence of Esther and Daniel, who returned to the faith, were then allowed to, under the rule of the Persians, return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city. So we're going to talk about all of that as it goes along. But first, tomorrow we'll talk about the kingdom of Judah.